Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I just wanted to hop on and talk really quickly about the 14 books that I read in October. I honestly thought I was going to read less in October just because the way that I was feeling throughout most of the month, I was super busy and I felt like I was having a hard time finding time to read, which honestly made me feel like I was getting into a reading slump. But I feel like that doesn't accurately describe what I was experiencing because I still really wanted to read. I just was struggling to find time. And then when I did find time, I was really tired. So I felt like my reading pace was a lot slower than usual. So I was honestly really surprised when I got to the end of the month and realized that I had actually finished 14 books, which is a few less than I normally do. I normally read somewhere between 15 to 20 books each month, but not so much less that I would say that I'm actually in a reading slump. So glad to kind of have that affirmation at the end of the month, which of course, it doesn't matter how many books you read as long as you're enjoying them. And I was enjoying a lot of these books, especially the ones I read towards the end of the month. So let's go ahead and get right into it. I do want to kind of give the disclaimer. Normally, I go over my TBR that we picked out, the 6 books that I selected from the prompts that I pulled from my TBR jar at the end of the month. However, unfortunately, I actually only fully finished one of those books, which we'll talk about a bit later. I did try to start the audiobook for Babbel because I was having a hard time finding time to read, and I really just wasn't connecting with the audiobook narrator. So I'm going to save that one to actually physically read, which is what I would prefer to do anyways, but just wanted to share that up front. Unfortunately, I didn't get to a lot of those books, but I am really still hoping to read them before the end of the month. I still have them sitting out. They're behind my November books here, and these are some of the self-help books that I'm trying to get to through the 75 hard, but that October TBR is actually still on my priority little table there that you can see in the back. So I'm not forgetting about them. I just really didn't have time to get to them. But that being said, the first book that I finished this month was The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. And this book is set during the Dust Bowl. And the individuals that the story revolves around are, first and foremost, our main character, which is a young woman at the start of the story who ends up in a little situation and it kind of changes the course of her life. I don't want to give too much away, but she ends up living on a farm. And then when the Dust Bowl happens, of course, they aren't able to grow crops the way that they normally would. And she and her family go west in search of a better life and work. And what ensues. And in the past, I have really enjoyed Kristen Hanna books, and this book was no exception. It wasn't a 5-star read for me, but I did rate it 4 stars and I really enjoyed it. I listened to this one as an audiobook and I did enjoy the audiobook narrator, so I can recommend that. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. I felt like it told a story about a group of people that I wasn't familiar with. And I really appreciated the opportunity to learn a little bit more about some of the history related to the individuals who migrated out towards California and out west during the Dust Bowl in search of a better life, and some of the things that they faced as they migrated in search of that life, and how some individuals really were able to persist and find resilience in the face of adversity. So definitely a really good read and not a low 4-star by any means. I would highly recommend it. Now, the second book that I finished this month was Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose. And this book has been on my radar for a while, but unfortunately, it kind of fell short for me. I rated it 3.75 stars, which is not a bad rating by any means, but just in terms of thrillers, it wasn't the most exciting thriller that I've ever read. And I felt like where the story was headed was obvious. And I feel that the author made some decisions that kind of gave away a big part of the plot, which I don't want to be too clear about because I don't want to ruin it for you if you're interested in it. But I wasn't overly thrilled about the outcome of the book. This was the first book that I've read by this author as well, so I'm definitely going to continue to pick up some of her other books and give them a try, but I was a little disappointed based on how often I hear other people talking about her books. I really was expecting this one to be a home run for me, and it just wasn't quite there. It was definitely readable and enjoyable and fast paced, and I feel that those are the reasons why I rated it 3.75 stars, but it was definitely predictable and a little bit silly in some places. I felt like sometimes, and not just in this book, but in the genre as a whole, characters in thrillers can be a little bit obtuse for no reason. They can overlook things that normal people wouldn't necessarily overlook, and they can be a little bit vapid when it comes to things being right in front of their face. So it was okay. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I don't recommend it. I just would say it's not one of my top thrillers that I've ever read. And for some reason, the next book that I picked up was Hooked by Emily McIntyre. I am a fan of Emily McIntyre as an individual. I really enjoy following her on social media, and I've been following her journey with cancer because I have personal family history of cancer. So seeing her go through that and being able to understand and relate to some of what she's talked about has been really nice. But I had never read any of her books before, and Hooked was available as a Skip the Line copy on Libby, which y'all know I am definitely a victim of the Skip the Line copies. If I see something good, I immediately pick it up and I drop everything else to read it. So I picked up Hooked, and I actually didn't end up rating this book. It's definitely erotica. There's a lot of smut in it. So if that's something that appeals to you, I definitely would recommend it for you. And this is part of a series where Emily kind of reimagines some villains from traditional Disney films or traditional stories and brings them into an adult setting with obviously some erotica. And there were just things right off the bat that really gave me the ick for the male main character in the series. There were actually some chapters where I kind of skipped through because it was a little bit more than I was interested in reading at the time that I was reading it. So I didn't rate this book because this just isn't personally my cup of tea. But if you are into that type of book, I would recommend it for you. I don't think it was poorly written by any means. It's just really not for me. And then the next book that I picked up was Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby, and I have been wanting to get into an S.A. Cosby read for a very long time. S.A. Cosby is actually from Virginia, where I'm originally from, and I knew that Razorblade Tears was actually set near Richmond, Virginia, which is really close to the area that I grew up in. So I was really excited to read it, and I've heard really great things about his work. So I definitely wanted to support him as an author, and I can really thankfully say that I rated this book 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I thought the book was so well done. The characters were very three-dimensional, and the plot unfolded in a way that really kept me on the edge of my seat throughout. And yeah, overall, I really just enjoyed this book. I enjoyed S.A. Cosby's writing. I wouldn't say that it was overly poetic or flowery, but it definitely did what it needed to do to create a well-written book that was very easy to digest and was very fast-paced for me to read. So I would definitely recommend that, and I'm very excited to read more S.A. Cosby. I know that All the Sinners Bleed is on Kindle Unlimited, and I also have a copy of his more recent release, which is King of Ashes. So definitely looking forward to reading more of his work, and I hope that they continue to be successful reads for me. And then after that, I had a few different arcs to get through this month, which if you'll remember from my last arc reading vlog, I still needed to get to the Oxford Soju Club. So I did read that. But before I got to that, I read The Genius Bat, which I feel like such a nerd when I say that I enjoy these types of books, but I did really enjoy this, and it was very cool because I actually got an art copy of this from NetGalley, but I was also sent an ALC through Libro.fm, so I was able to both see the written product as well as listen to the audiobook for this particular book, and I really enjoyed it. The audiobook had some sound clips to reference because this is literally just a book about bats and research on bats, and it talked a little bit about their communication patterns and echolocation. And so in the audiobook, there's actually audio clips of some of those things, which I really enjoyed. As a kid growing up, I watched a lot of Animal Planet and Discovery Channel, things like that. So, of course, this appealed to me. And for this type of book, I definitely thought that the writing was very interesting and kept me engaged. So, I did rate that 5 stars. And then after that, I got to the Oxford Soju Club, which was really interesting. It definitely wasn't anything like what I was expecting when I picked that book up. So, I would definitely recommend looking into it if it interests you. It actually revolved around some secret spy networks and some of the ways that they interacted, and how some took a more human approach to different things and were more likely to vary from their directive versus other groups that were kind of stereotyped to be more glued to their directive and just follow orders. And I just thought it was really interesting overall, and it had this really cool concept where a lot of these spy cells really revolved around community spaces like the Oxford Soju Club, which is a Korean restaurant. And then there's also a bar that another group kind of revolves around and runs. So I thought that was really interesting, and I thought it brought an interesting parallel into the story as we explored some of the characters' backgrounds and their family histories and how they related things back to their families, and how their upbringings definitely changed the way they were operating in their lines of work. One thing I will say though, since I did receive this as an ARC, the format of the EPUB that I had made it very difficult to understand when the book was switching back and forth between characters. So hopefully that is resolved in the official copy of it that's available if you do choose to get that as an EPUB. But just wanted to make that note that that did detract from my reading experience just a little bit, but overall I did enjoy the story, and I thought it was a very different concept that I hadn't read before. And I did ultimately rate that 4 stars. And then the last arc that I got to was also another nonfiction, and it was The Zorg. And the full title of the book is The Zorg, A Tale of Greed and Murder That Inspired the Abolition of Slavery. And I thought this book, again, was really well done. I also really enjoy learning about history. It was never my strongest subject in school, but actually, like watching history, visiting historical places, and learning about history really is something that interests me. So I felt like it wasn't all that surprising that I did enjoy this book. And again, I had the audiobook as an ALC from Libro, as well as the ebook as an ARC from NetGalley. So I did have both formats. And again, I really felt like that enhanced my reading experience. But I definitely learned a lot from this book about the slave trade, which of course I knew occurred, and some of the atrocities that occurred throughout it. But this particular tale of the Zorg and the lives that were lost, and the way that that ultimately went on to help to fuel the fire that led to the abolishment of slavery, was really, really amazing to read, as heartbreaking as it was. So I did really enjoy this overall. I think that if you're not familiar with the tale of this ship and the way that it helped to lead to that abolishment of slavery, I would recommend this book for you. I think it's a great topic that we should all learn more about. And so I definitely enjoyed it, and I did end up rating this 5 stars overall. So I would highly recommend The Zorg, which I just have to say, this month was a much better month for ARCs than the month previous. I definitely enjoyed my ARCs that I had and read this month way more than I enjoyed the ones that I read in September. And then I also finished the Summer I Turned Pretty trilogy. I read We'll Always Have Summer, and I did listen to this as an audiobook. I listened to the other 2 previous books as audiobooks, and I personally haven't engaged with the show that came out, but I've heard a lot about it, so that's why I initially wanted to pick up the books. And honestly, this third book just didn't really do it for me. I wasn't very interested in it. I didn't feel very engaged, and I was kind of disappointed in the story and the way that Belly was acting and some of the things that were happening. And ultimately, I just wasn't that satisfied. I think the book ended in the way that I wanted it to end, but I wasn't really happy with a lot of the characters' decisions throughout this book. So I ended up rating it 3 stars. It just wasn't a very satisfying ending to the story for me. And this one, more than any of them, really felt juvenile to me. So that was really unfortunate. And the next book that I finished this month was Mr. Mercedes, which is the first book in the Bill Hodges trilogy by Stephen King. And I'm not going to talk too much about this book now because I did do a full Stephen King reading vlog. So if you haven't seen that, pop over to the channel and make sure you watch it, because this was a 5-star read for me, and I would love it if more people picked it up and read it so we could talk about it. So definitely check out that video for my full review. And after Mr. Mercedes, I kept the ball rolling with a great read because I picked up Service Model by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And this tells the story of a robot that is meant to be kind of a butler character and how his world kind of falls apart around him. And it was so interesting to read and to hear things from the perspective of this robot that doesn't believe that he's sentient, but there's another character that believes he's sentient. And so that back and forth was really interesting. And I really love sci-fi, and especially books that include things like robots and AI. So I really enjoyed this book overall. I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to give too many points of the story away. And I think it starts kind of with a bang. So I definitely would recommend reading this, and I did rate it 5 stars. And then following Service Model, I rounded off reading my Alex, I think his last name might be Michaelides. I'm not sure. The author of The Silent Patient. I rounded off reading all 3 of his books. So I've now read The Silent Patient, The Fury, and The Maidens. And The Maidens was the book that I read this month. And honestly, I think I'm just done with this author, to be honest with you. I enjoyed The Silent Patient. It's not like one of my all-time favorite thrillers, but I thought it was really promising, and I was excited to read more from him. And then The Fury and now The Maidens were both letdowns for me, unfortunately. So I did only rate The Maidens 3 stars, and I don't want to go into too much detail over it. I just really think that this author's writing isn't for me, and I'm probably not going to pick up anything else that he's written. And then after The Maidens, I read The Suicide House, which is by Charlie Donlia. I'm not sure. But I picked this one up because my book club was reading it. And technically it's book 2 in a series, but it's kind of like an Agatha Christie where it's the same detectives but different storylines. So they reference some things that were probably in the first book, but it wasn't necessary to have read the first book to read the second one. And I thought that this was okay. It did have some surprises for me, and I thought that the way that everything tied together was really interesting, but it just didn't blow me away. So I ended up rating this one 3 stars. I felt like the author was trying a little too hard to make the main female character that's a detective quirky. And there were a lot of mentions of a specific brand of stout throughout the book. And I was at the point where I was like, if she mentions this freaking brand one more time, I'm done with this book. So I felt like that was just a little bit overdone. I felt like they were doing a lot of telling instead of just letting things naturally flow in the story with that regard. So it was fine. I rated it 3 stars. I wouldn't say that I would recommend it or not recommend it. I just thought it was okay. And then we finally get to the one book that was on my physical TBR that I did finish this month, and that is Where the Dark Stands Still. And I actually didn't realize that Where the Dark Stands Still plays into and revolves around a lot of folklore that I actually really love and am interested in. This book reminded me very frequently of The Bear and the Nightingale and that trilogy as a whole by Katherine Arden, which was a 5-star trilogy for me. So right off the bat, as soon as I realized that it was similar folklore, I was really hooked and engaged in the story. But I do think throughout my entire time reading it, I was comparing it to The Bear and the Nightingale because I did love that series so much, and this kind of felt like the little sibling of that series. So unfortunately, I do think because I loved that one so much, I recognized where this one wasn't executing it at the same maturity level and in the same way that Katherine Arden had articulated a lot of things in her book. So unfortunately, I do think that may have lowered my rating or my enjoyment of the book overall, but I did really enjoy it regardless. So I would definitely recommend it if you haven't read it, especially if you're not familiar with this type of folklore. I believe that it's Russian folklore, but I don't want you to quote me on that. I would definitely look it up. But a lot of the spirits and characters, like the forest spirit, the Leche, are similar between the two books. So I would definitely say look into that if you haven't read anything about it before. I think it's extremely interesting, and I really like the way that both authors ended up presenting it in their books. But ultimately, I did rate this one 3.75 stars. I think it was just a little more juvenile for me, and I'm definitely moving away from young adult books, and I think this one is technically a young adult, so that definitely impacted my reading. And then, of course, that unfortunate comparison with a previous 5-star series that I've read probably just lowered that a little bit. And then the last book that I finished this month was also in my Stephen King reading vlog. I read Pet Sematary, and I honestly think this might be my favorite King book that I've read so far. I did rate it 5 stars, but again, I don't want to go into too much detail here, and it's not a book that I can really go into a lot of detail about anyways because I don't want to spoil it. But if you want to see my full review, again, head over, watch that vlog on my channel. I would highly recommend reading this book, especially if you haven't read it yet or you're not familiar with the story. I think there's a lot of surprises in store for those who haven't read it, but I will say it does grapple with some difficult topics, and definitely topics that are a little more based in reality than some other horror books. So just know that going in, know that it deals with a lot of loss, and there's a lot of talk of death and handling grief. So just know that. Take a look at the triggers if those are things that might bother you before you pick it up. But I would highly recommend it. And again, I do think it's my favorite King that I've read so far. So that being said, those are the 14 books that I finished in October. Overall, I feel like I had a really strong reading month. I had some really high highs and quite a lot of 5-star reads. And then my lows were kind of just in the middle. So I can't really complain. And overall, I really, really enjoyed the books that I did end up rating 5 stars this month. So let me know down in the comments, did you have any 5-star reads in October or any books that really stood out to you? If you've read any of these 14 books, please let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts. But otherwise, I hope you have an amazing day. I appreciate you so, so much for watching this video, and I hope you have a good one. Bye!